I was the guy who was, from very beginning, I was always a guy who had a lot of fantasies in my head, right? I'm going to be rich, I'm going to be this, I'm going to be that. And by the time I was 32, I realized I wasn't there, right? And what I did realize, though, was that I had a formula which was pretty successful in terms of doing flips, right? And I was like, if I can just take that same thing, I knew 100% I could make it work with rentals. Maybe it would be slow, maybe it would be something different, but I knew I could make it work. And it was basically kind of what's in behind me, which was 257. And that was, at that time, my goal was in 2 years, I wanted to be able to buy 5 houses and get them paid off in 7. Now today it seems like, why would you pay them off? But at the time the business environment was different. We're talking about 2011. And I didn't have, even after doing that many flips, it's not like I had a lot of cash, right? And I certainly did not have the confidence at that time to be able to go and raise capital. I just didn't have that. Maybe now, looking back at it, it's different. But at the time, I knew what I could make work. And I was like, I'm going to stick to it until I get to $3,000 net a month. At that time, the goal was that humble. Then it got to 6,000. From 6, it was 12. From 12, it was 20. 20, it was 50. And by the time I started getting 20 or so a month net after expenses in terms of cash flow, I'm like, hey, man, this works pretty well. Maybe for some other people, it's multifamilies, it's everything else in the world, but this works for me. I'm going to stick to it, and let me see just what happens. And from there, it got up to close to now about 127 a month, 127,000 a month comes in, day out. I don't have to do anything for it in terms of management. I don't manage the properties. I don't, and everything that I do is I don't raise rents, meaning if somebody comes and most of the properties, 95% of all properties that I bought them, rehabbed them, refinanced them, and then I would give people a 2 to 3 year lease. There was no 1 year lease. You have perfect credit score, I'm not going to do a year lease, which was kind of unusual at the time because people are like, that makes no sense. I'm like, well, I don't want turnover. So when I only find people that want to sign a 2 or 3 year lease, they don't move out for 6, 7 years. So there's almost no turnover. So for every 100 houses, maybe we have 10 or 12 that come up, 15 that come up in each year for turnovers. So that kind of a very simple way of doing it has worked pretty well, man. So I was like, if it's not broke, don't break it. And every time I've tried to go do what other people do, it doesn't work for me. I have a formula, I stick to it, and this is, it's taken me 10 years, right? This is not, I wish I could tell you, oh my God, 3 years, I was going to go fast forward this stuff. That wasn't the case, but I realized I had a very unique box. Chicago is a very unique place where you could find properties literally 50% on the dollar, fix it, and still be able to cash flow $500 to $700 after all expenses, which is very rare in most places. And these are $160,000, $170,000 houses that appraise out at $260,000, $270,000 in good suburbs of Chicago. So I'm not in any war zones at all. And I've said it many, many times, I have a big mouth and a small body, so I don't go to areas that are interesting.
Nice. Well, I think taking 10 years to get to over $100,000 of net income without having to do much lift now is, I'd say most people would say that's probably worth it. And I think it's a testament.
And that's where
Go ahead. Sorry.
That's where, Kirby, it's a lot of times people think we need to do bigger things, right? And I have never been a believer in doing with flips. I did small flips, consistency of results, right? And even with rentals, as it's not about how big a building you buy, it's about what is your all-in cost. At the end of the day, your cost basis matters, right? Because that's what generates cash flow. Because if your payments on a property are $1,200, $1,300, the thing generates $2,000 a month. Guess what? You're always going to beat somebody. There are a lot of people that have 100 properties and they just have properties in crappy locations, right? With crappy tenants. I'm sorry, 100 properties with, I would rather have 50 good locations with good quality tenants rather than have 100. It's not about quantity. It's like some people try the whole thing of, it's like marriage, it's like partnerships. It's about quality. Right? It's not about quantity. I personally believe quantity creates a mess if it's the wrong quantity and if it's the wrong quality, right? And so and there's not too many people that can say that they own anything, be it real estate, be it anything, where that produces 100,000 cash flow a month. I didn't know of anybody that made $1 million, $1.5 million just purely from real estate. That's passive. Right? Not because of active income and Airbnbs. I mean, quite honestly, I looked at what you were doing with Airbnbs. I looked at Bill Powers, a couple of other people that I had faith in. Your market is a little bit different, right? But my whole idea was, okay, at the time I was about at 110, 112, and the idea was, how do I go from there to 250? $250,000 a month in net cash flow. So that basically puts you at about $3 million for the year in terms of cash flow. And those, I think, are pretty big numbers, because what would your net worth have to be to generate $3 million in net cash flow every single year? I mean, think about that.
Yeah.
We don't think about it from that perspective, but I mean, those are some big numbers.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, especially passively.
Yeah.
I think one thing I just want to highlight too for people who are listening, like I think this is just such a huge testament to sticking to what you know, like going deep in a niche, especially in this YouTube generation right now, where every day you can find a new way to get rich on YouTube, and it's like that shiny object syndrome that so many people have. I think that's the downfall of most people, as opposed to doing what you just said and what I try to do, and what a lot of other people that we both know that have been really successful, like Bill Powers, who you mentioned, they stuck to what they know and did it over and over and over again, and got great results over time. And I think that makes so much sense. So in that same vein, then, you mentioned the 257 strategy. So what does that look like tactically speaking? What do you recommend if somebody wanted to follow that strategy, which I know has helped a lot of people at this point get to financial freedom, or at least build up a lot of cash flow? What do you recommend?
So my philosophy is simple, right? To me, it kind of goes something like this: that when you get in real estate, number one, you want to be a multimillionaire in real estate, keep your job, right? Please, for God's sake, do not quit your job. If you have a good job, keep your job, right? And start building on the side. And to go back really quick to what you were saying, right? If you watch any sort of YouTube, you watch any sort of social media, which we're all exposed to, I mean, you will feel dumb, you will feel poor, you will feel not attractive, you'll feel all those things, because seems to be everybody online today, the new thing I'm hearing nowadays is, oh, we buy businesses. Forget about real estate, forget about stocks, forget about anything else. We buy businesses scale up, and you can own 9, 10, 12, 15, 100 businesses, and look at me, right? There's no evidence. Ben, if you have a singular good way of generating cash flow, you're pretty good, right? Forget about, and whoever the speakers are, I'm sure they can own 50, 60 businesses. I'm just telling you reality, America. 99.9% Americans can't make one thing work. Forget about buying 10 businesses and all this nonsense, right? I mean, and big ideas and all this stuff sounds great, right? It sounds great to pontificate. The challenge is, let's start with one. And let's make something, let's get to $5,000 a month, $10,000 a month, and then we'll talk, right? And that's really my philosophy with 257. And that is that you're going to do flips and or wholesales to basically create income or to run on a treadmill. That's your everyday 9 to 5 if you don't have a 9 to 5. If you have a 9 to 5, then keep it and then start accumulating rentals on the side. And the whole idea of 257 is that in 2 years, you're going to accumulate 5 properties. And the way to buy property number 1 would be, you're going to buy the property as if you're buying a flip. 70% of ARV, whatever the ARV is. So let's say the ARV is 200,000. 70% of that is 140. 140 minus whatever your rehab cost is, right? As long as you buy with that formula, so if your rehab cost is 40,000, then you're paying 100,000 for that property. I'm just throwing out ballpark numbers. And the other formula that we watch for on the back end is that your principal, interest, taxes, insurance, basically your PITI, needs to be about 75% of total rent, right? And I'm just talking holistically right now, that if you follow that in general, your 257 will work. But for that, the way it works is, let's say you set up one rental property in January this year. Then you're going to wait 6 months. You're going to accumulate all the cash flow. You're not going to go spend it. That becomes your little kitty as reserves in case something breaks, something goes wrong, right? This is old-fashioned way of buying properties. Month 6 and 7, you start looking. 8, 9, sometime you buy your second property. Same exact thing. You're going to buy it, rehab it, have 25 to 30% equity in it, refinance the property, and put it back again on the rent roll. Now you wait another 3 months this time. Now you have a little bit bigger kitty put aside. Now you go to property number 2, right? And first year, if you can barely manage to do 2 properties, great. But as you do something over and over, what happens is the speed picks up. So second year, generally, what we see is people are able to do 3 properties because now they're used to it. They're like, okay, this is something I understand. And then the point is that as long as you have about $500 per cash flow in general, 500, sometimes it's going to be 350, sometimes it's going to be 700. Now you put that aside. And now you take that $2,500 after you've put it aside for 6 months, and you start attacking property number 1. My basic philosophy is this, that most of the times if people have 5, 6 properties paid off over a 10, 12-year period, they will be better off than 99.9% of Americans. That's just something that I believe in. Now, practicality, Kirby, what happens is people get to 5 and they're like, oh my God, Andrew, this works, right? Let's get to 10. So then they get to 10. Once they get to 10, they're like, oh, might as well get to 20. But initially, when somebody has never owned a rental property, tell them, oh my God, one day you're going to have 25 rental properties, it's unbelievable. So it's small steps. It's like, hey, let's think about an idea of 2 years. What if we could teach you how to buy 5 houses and don't touch the money, just start using that cash flow to pay down the properties. And for reasonable people, that is very, very attractive because they're like, oh my God, yeah, that makes sense. That's something that I would like to do.